Excellent. Okay. Well, I want to jump right into it because I have so much information to share with you today, and I can't wait to go through it. So, okay. So why master copies? That's going to be the topic today. And as we get started, please give yourself this time to actually learn. Focus is a rare commodity these days, and we want to make sure that you have the time and the attention to really learn today. So please turn off your notifications on your phone. Maybe grab something to take some notes with. For me, I really like to learn like cuddling a cup of coffee or tea. So, whatever helps you learn or focus, take a moment and, make sure that we're here, we're present, and we're ready to learn today. Okay. Okay, if you have questions, you can ask them in the little chat box there, and there will also be a question and answer session at the end of class today. So, sorry, I'm distracted because I see these like little spots on my face from the sun today. We'll try this. All right. So if you have questions, please ask them in the chat. And then at the very end, I promise I will answer all the questions. Sometimes I'll occasionally ignore a question as it's coming up in the chat because the next slide is going to answer that question. Or sometimes if it's going to be a tangent, I'll come back to it at the end. But if for any reason you still have questions at the end that didn't get answered, I will stay and answer all of the questions, I promise. Nobody will leave here with questions. Okay. And then also, if you're new to the School of Atelier Arts, please consider following us on social media. If you're enjoying this workshop, please, we do these because we're trying to bring knowledge out there into the world. Please, if this is something that interests you or you have friends that might be interested in it, please encourage them to sign up for this workshop series. Like, I don't do these free workshop series that often, so please help your friends and family take advantage of it. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Mandy, and I love Mastercopies and I love painting. And I'm going to focus this entire session just on Mastercopies, how to learn from Mastercopies, and why they are so important for learning how to teach you how to paint better than you can paint right now. So we're going to do a deep dive into this today. And my goal is for all of you to walk away with a few things that you didn't know about painting or learning how to paint. Okay, so I'm going to start off with just a few questions, and please let me know in the chat. I love hearing from the students. I'm not one of those people that's like, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to talk all my way through. I need to hear from you to make sure that I'm meeting your needs and your learning goals. So let me know, does this sound like you? You've gone to museums and you see these paintings on the walls and you're like, how the heck did they ever paint that way? Like, my work right now is so far removed from what I see as possible. Like, how do I bridge that gap? Has that happened to you before? Like seeing these old masterworks and just feeling like maybe they got hit on the head by a talent fairy, or, they had some sort of magic skill, or like there's something missing that you just can't have. Like when you see these works, have you ever felt that way in museums? Or maybe you've seen this image. So has anybody seen this one here where somebody was trying really hard to look at the old masters? And in this case, this was a woman that was trying to help a church somewhere in Spain restore a painting, but clearly this person didn't have the technical skill of the original artist. So this is an example of a master copy gone really, really wrong. But has anybody here ever tried a master copy and then discovered that even though you were looking at something and you were doing your very best, that it just didn't look quite right on the other side? Has that happened to you? Yeah, yeah, me too, George. It's definitely happened to me. And it's like, why can't I? If it's just copying, why is it so hard, right? Like, what's the problem? Where's the disconnect? For sure, Cassie. Okay, or does this sound like you? Like you're finally getting down to do a master copy, and then you're trying so hard to mix the color, and no matter what you do, like you just can't get that green or that red, and you just make this big mess on your palette, and it's like, you need a green, and your paint looks green, but it's not the right green, and it's not the right green, but you don't know how to get the right green. Like, so this like palette frustration or color frustration where you can see that it's not right, but you don't know in which way to correct your color to get it accurate. Okay, so we're going to cover these 3 pain points today. These 3 things that you know, might be standing in our way of us creating a successful master copy. Okay, so what's coming up? We're going to learn about what the old masters know that you do not know yet. But of course, by the end of this training today, you will have a much better idea of what they knew and how they went about this process. We're also going to learn how to learn from master copies. So it's not just about sitting down and like copying exactly what you see. That's not how it works. You need to have a process for copying the masters, and you need to understand what you're trying to learn and how you're going to learn it. So it's like if you just open a math book and do all the math problems, like maybe you're learning, maybe you're not, but if you understand how those problems build together to teach you something beyond, you know, just 1 + 1 = 2, right? Then that's where the real learning happens. And so the same is true for master copies. We're not blindly copying the old masters. What we're trying to do is look at things through the old masters' eyes and think critically about how those painters solved specific problems and determining for ourselves whether we can use that same problem-solving technique in our own paintings. So there's a reason that artists like Delacroix in his journals, you know, talks about copying artists all the time. We, you know, one of the only surviving, the only reason we know one of Da Vinci's paintings exists, the Battle of Anghiari, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, is because Rubens did a master copy of it before it was lost, right? So we know that one of the most efficient ways to learn from previous artists, from artists that know more than us, is to create master copies. But just like that lady who was, you know, restoring that painting in Spain, if we don't know what we're doing, it's not going to help us learn, right? So it's not just blindly copying. It's not something you can just sit down and do and expect to learn and have good results. You need someone that knows just enough more than you to help guide you. And that's what I hope to do for you today. Okay, so and the old masters and color. I think more than anything else, this is where students really mess up when they're doing master copies, because they, you know, are just getting approximate colors and they're not spending the time or learning the knowledge that they need to create the accurate colors. So how do we get the accurate colors? How do we keep our palette from being a mess? What's wrong with this palette? Like why would we not be able to make a master copy with this palette? And there's a lot of reasons why. This is a terrible palette for so many reasons. And I'm going to talk to you about why this is so bad and why that this palette will never get you to be able to make a master copy, no matter how long you spend mixing colors. So it's about having good knowledge to start with, good guidance from someone that knows more than you, and, you know, pushing forward and really using our critical thinking skills to learn efficiently from the old masters. Okay, and then at the end, I'm going to share with you a little bit about our Atelier painting bootcamp and why it might be the right fit for you. So again, this whole workshop series that we're doing right now, it's part of our celebration for the launch of this new class. And I'll be discussing this at the very end, so you'll get all the training first. And if you want to stick around at the end and learn more about this online class that we're now offering, I encourage you to do so. Okay, so is it in your heart to paint realistically? And like, is it something that you truly desire? You know, because this is not easy. Learning Atelier skills, even doing a master copy, is not easy. You have to really want it and you have to be willing to work at it. Unfortunately, there's no talent fairy that comes and bops you on the head and then suddenly you can paint realistically. The good news is that anybody, and I mean absolutely anybody, even the people that can't even draw a stick figure, can learn to draw and paint at a high technical level with good instruction, okay, from somebody who knows what they're doing. Part of the problem why there's so much confusion in the world right now is that these skills, these realism skills, fell out of favor for a period of time. Like the last 100 years, they almost went extinct. And just now there's been this renaissance and this rediscovery of these techniques. But you know, the problem is that we have a lot of people, and I count myself among them. I was an art teacher. I was teaching in Montana for years without this training. And my students were like, how do I make it look real? How do I make it look right? And I didn't really have the answers for them because I didn't have these skills. How could I teach something that I didn't know? And so a reason that a lot of people feel that they just can't paint today is because whatever experience they've had in art education, if they wanted to paint realistically, like what, or draw like what you see behind me here, they weren't able to do it because they didn't have access to instructors with that knowledge. All right. So if it's in your heart to paint realistically, you absolutely can, no matter what your current level is, no matter, you know, how far removed you feel it is, no matter how far away you feel like you are from that goal. If you have the discipline to learn and train with somebody who knows what they're doing, you can draw and paint realistically, absolutely, at levels beyond your expectations. Okay, so my paintings used to look like this, and I was like a self-trained painter, right? And this is kind of where I was, and like, you know, it's fine, but I wanted it to look real. I wanted it to look very realistic, and this is the closest I could come to that. And, you know, there are hints of, being near it or kind of close to it, but it wasn't really what I was going for. I wanted something more real. I wanted it to feel like the old masters and include those skill sets that the old masters had. And I could tell by looking at this that I wasn't there right now. And then I finally discovered Atelier training, and it blew my mind, right? So I was teaching in Montana. My students were asking me for help. I finally discovered Atelier training, what it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, you mean if I just like go and study at the specialized school for a number of years, then I can learn the skill that I always wanted to know. And to me, it was kind of like going to Hogwarts, right? Like, you mean if I just study really hard for a number of years that I can, do this magical thing that I always wanted to do? And it's true, you can. These skills exist and you can learn them. Now, of course, the problem is that I left my teaching job and I moved across the country, and I actually ended up studying full-time for more than 5 years in an atelier to learn these skills. And, the reason that these skills aren't more broadly known is because a lot of people can't do that, right? Like, it's not a possibility for a lot of people to move across the world or the country and go train in person full-time. And the really cool thing about this moment we live in now, and especially, through quarantine and everything else, is that there's really good instruction online now if you can find an Atelier trained instructor. Okay, so now I paint like this. So this is a painting in progress using the Atelier skills, right? So, you can really see the difference between this level of realism and this level of realism, all right? And this is still an unfinished painting, but I'm hoping that you can see what's going on here, like what a difference it makes to have training. And master copies are the key to this. If you want to learn how to paint, you need to learn how to create good master copies, not like the master copy that we saw earlier in the slideshow, like good master copies. Like, how do you competently copy so that you're actually learning skills from these old masters? Okay, so one thing you can do that used to be very common was you can copy in museums. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that the Louvre was originally only open to artists, and the collection was curated and collected 100% for the intention of training artists locally, right? And to provide the best source material to train artists in France. That's what the original Louvre was to help artists learn from other artists. Now, unfortunately, many museums don't allow copying. This is a museum in Seattle that did allow copying that I was able to copy at. But it's such a key part of the training. It's essential. Master copies are going to teach you how to paint. Okay, so we talked about why we should make these. We want to learn what the old masters know. It's kind of like, we don't give a kid an instrument and say, write a symphony, right? We say, hey, we're going to teach you how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb or these other songs. Those are master copies, right? We're not asking students to create original music the minute we hand them an instrument. We're asking them to learn the notes, learn the fingerings, learn what's already known about music so that you can go off and be creative with it. And that's what master copies are. It's kind of like learning Mary Had a Little Lamb, but like music, there's levels, where it gets harder and harder and harder. And with painting, there are levels of paintings too. So now that we agree that master copies can help us learn how to paint better, let's figure out what's wrong. Like, what's going wrong with our master copies? What's preventing us from learning? Okay, first off, in this one, the drawing. The drawing is atrocious. And a lot of people don't realize that when you are painting, you are drawing, right? So in a final painting, more often than not, there aren't lines around everything, okay? So what happens is that those lines are being created because you put one color next to another color in a painting. And when you're painting, paint is a lot harder to control than, say, a pencil line. So let's say you put the dark color down next to the light color. They create a line because light next to dark creates the illusion of a line, right? But then the black paint actually went too far over, right? Oh, crap. Now I need to push the white one over here. Oh, and then the dark needs to go. And so what happens is you get these lines that kind of start migrating and moving around, right? And you can see that in this painting that like the mouth in particular, like what is even going on there? Like it's completely disappeared. And the lights and darks have, yeah. Anyways, this was a viral meme for a reason, right? But there's a lot to be learned from it. Like you can't just say, oh, I'm going to do a master copy and actually learn from the old master. You need to have a process, you need to have some control, and you need some guidance from somebody that knows more than you. Okay, the values. So if you look in the eye socket on the original, there's like a shadow. So, your head is a skull with flesh on it. And most often the light's coming from above and casting a shadow, below. Your nose casts a shadow, your lips cast shadows. But you can see here in this master copy that the casting of the shadow, is not there. Like, look how light that we call this the sausage of the eye, this kind of part underneath your eyebrow but above your eyelid. We call that the eye sausage. So it kind of makes like an egg shape here. We can see how bright that is, but if you look at the original, like it's almost entirely in shadow. So this person is trying to make this copy, but not paying attention to light and shadow, not understanding the values when painting. Okay, and then the color, right? So we talked earlier about, you're mixing color and you're getting close, but not quite. Like you could say arguably in this master copy, like that is a flesh tone kind of, right? But it's not the same as the original color over here. And what's wrong with this color? Well, part of the color, it's too yellow. The original has a more pink undertone. Part of the problem with the color is that it's too dark. If you look in the cheek here, it's lighter in the original. Part of the problem is the chroma, the intensity of the color. So not only is it yellow, but it's fairly intense yellow, whereas the original is much more neutral and a little bit more pinky. All right, so these color problems, if you understand color theory and you're approaching your master copies with a color theory mindset, then you're going to be able to mix the right color. So you need to have the right drawing, you need to have the right values, you need to have the right color. Okay, and this is going to lead us into the palette situation. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier that this palette is a complete mess, right? But why? Why is this palette like so out of control? Can you give me your guesses in the chat? Like what do you think is wrong with this palette? I gave you some hints earlier too. because there's just all sorts of things wrong with this palette. But you wouldn't know that unless you'd have spent time in an atelier or with atelier trained people. So Patty's saying too many brights. Absolutely. We have really, really chromatic colors on here, and not necessarily the ones that we need. There's no separation of color, Cassie's saying. And Maria, the colors aren't mixed properly. Yes, 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 all of these things and more. Okay. These are good statements here. Okay, so what is wrong with this palette? A wrong order. Abril is saying that this is super key. Like the more systems you have in place for painting, the more you can streamline the painting process, even like the logistics of the painting process, the easier painting becomes for you to do. So these are all excellent, excellent points. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about these brushes. Okay, like that one in the middle is actually a watercolor brush. It's so soft, you're not going to be able to like hold oil paint on that brush. Okay, it's like not possible. I mean, it's possible, but like you're not going to be able to control the paint with that kind of brush. Like if you want to paint in oils, you need an oil painting brush. And then we can talk about the shape. So the shape isn't terrible, but my preferred shape for controlling paint is actually a filbert brush, which is like a brush that's been cut off. So it's like a flat on top, but then it has kind of rounded corners on it. We call that a filbert. The advantage of a filbert brush is that you're able to get both very straight lines. It's really easy to maneuver into corners. And unlike a round brush, it tends not to create ridges on the side when you're creating a brush stroke. So to me, these are all advantages for painting. Now, that being said, every atelier artist I know is super loyal to a very specific brush. So I'm not saying that this is the one true brush or not the one true brush, but I do know that if you use a watercolor brush, that the bristles are going to be so flimsy that they're going to splay on your canvas and you're going to have a very difficult time controlling it. So the brushes are a big problem here. Okay. All right. I'm calling this Pastelomania, but do you notice how almost every color mixed on this palette is one light value, right? So like, how are you going to paint your shadows if you only have this like medium light value on your palette, right? So this is not going to, like, you're only going to be able to paint one value, and that's going to make your whole painting look super, super flat, because without, you know, strong lights and strong shadows, your painting is just going to look very weird and washed out. So not having a full range of lights and darks on your palette is a problem. What you need, what the solution to this is to create strings, create color strings on your palette. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. But basically, the problem here is that there is just no range in value. The paint is super chromatic. And so here's our next problem. Well, yeah, we'll talk about this now. All right, so the paint is really chromatic. What does that mean? The paint is super intense in color, right? But skin tones, like if you look, you know, at my skin tone here, like what makes skin challenging to paint is that it's actually quite neutral. It's actually very close to gray, and it has just a little bit of pinky gray or green gray or orangey gray or grainy gray, right? It's not, and the closer to neutral you get, the harder it is to make it just a little bit yellow, a little bit orange, right? But look how intense these colors are. There's only one area that has even a little bit of neutrality, and it's close to where that arrow is pointing, to the right of where that arrow is pointing. That's the only slightly neutral thing on the whole palette. But again, the problem is that the whole palette, what's mixed there is largely one value, and we can't paint with one note. Like, can you imagine hearing a song with one note? Like, I'm sure it exists out there, and it might be a fun, like, interesting experiment, but it's not like interesting as a listener, in my opinion, to hear a one note song. So there's a great question in the chat. So should the palette be larger? This is a great question, because Well, like many things in painting, it depends, right? So it depends how big of strings you prefer to mix. And again, I'm going to talk about strings in a minute. It depends on how many colors on your palette. So this palette has quite a few colors on it right now. There are some people in the Atelier world that paint with only 4 colors, a black, white, yellow, and red. Okay, that's known as a Zorn palette. So you don't have to have tons of colors. There's advantages to having more colors and disadvantages to having colors. And actually, the last workshop in this series that I'm teaching on Sunday is covering color theory much more extensively. So I think I titled it How to Mix Any Color You Want. So we'll do like that whole workshop is just on mixing colors. So I don't want to go too deep into it now because we still have other things about Mastercopies to cover in this class, but definitely if you're in the workshop series, you'll want to tune in for that one for a deep dive into color. Okay, and the wrong paint. Okay, now I'm not saying that you can't paint in acrylics. This is acrylic paint on here. You can tell by the way the surface is kind of holding up. And I'm not saying that you can't paint with acrylics. I know people that do paint with acrylics. However, it is very, very difficult to paint something similar to the old masters when you're using a completely different kind of paint than they are, because many of the techniques they used to create their paintings involve oil paint, and oil paint has the advantage of drying very, very slow. So we call that in the painting world, the paint stays open longer, meaning that you can mush it around, you can mix it with other colors, you can make corrections, you have more time to think. Whereas acrylic painting, an acrylic paint largely dries very quick. That's its big advantage. Now, some people use what are called open acrylics, which stay wet longer, which if you're going to insist on painting in acrylics, please use open acrylics, because if you're trying, like often by the time you mix a string in acrylics, it's already dry. And then what are you doing, right? So it doesn't give you the time you need to be as thoughtful with your paint as you need. And there's a lot of misinformation about oil paint out there. So some people are like, oh, is oil paint more dangerous than acrylic paint? But if you look at the paint itself, largely the pigment, what's creating the color, is the same in oil paint or acrylic paint. So whatever, if you're buying a cadmium red acrylic, it's the same pigment as cadmium red oil. The difference is that acrylic paints are actually plastics, right? And I still don't know what all the ingredients in plastics are, but the binder, what keeps all the pigment together, is plastic in acrylic paint. Whereas oil paint is bound with vegetable oil, right? Sometimes walnut oil, sometimes linseed oil, occasionally a different kind of oil, but it's literally vegetable oil. So oil paint is vegetable oil plus pigment. Acrylic paint is plastics with who knows what's in them plus pigment. So it's not that oil painting is inherently more dangerous. Now, the reason it gets a bad rap is because until recently, the terps and the other mineral spirits and things that you use with oil painting tended to have a strong vapor and causing issues. Artists are always experimenting with different mediums. 100 years ago, it wasn't unheard of for people to be boiling lead as part of a medium, which is a big no-no. You don't ever want to do that. So there's we have a lot better understanding of what we should be putting in our paint and what we don't. And the way I've kind of come up to work around this, especially because I teach oil painting classroom settings, both to adults and students, and is that I just don't allow any additives in the paint at all. So in my painting classes and in this painting boot camp I'm going to talk to you about at the end, you're only using paint and not additives. I don't let you put additives in your paint because I don't want to deal with the unknowns in there. So on the supply list, there is a suggestion for something called a small bottle of Gamasol, but even that you don't necessarily have to have. But it's been specially formulated to evaporate at a lower rate than other terps. And it's the only kind of terp. It's technically not a terp, but we still use that term to describe it. It's the only one that is allowed in any atelier I've ever been into because it keeps the vapors down. Okay, I just went on like a whole big rant about oil paint. Does anybody have any questions about why this is the wrong paint for creating? Like, if you want to create a master copy that was painted in oils, I strongly encourage you to get oil paint to create that master copy. Okay. Okay, another problem with this situation with this palette is that this palette is raw. What does that mean and why is that a problem? All right, this is a mistake I see students making all the time, and it's a completely unnecessary frustration when you're trying to learn how to paint. So basically, when you get a new palette, it's often just wood that hasn't been treated with anything, right? It doesn't have a veneer, it doesn't have anything on it. And what happens is if you put oil paint on a raw palette, it's going to suck up all the oil from your paint, and it's going to dry your paint out very quickly, and it's going to be very frustrating to try to mix colors with it, and it's going to stain your palette on top of that. So what you want to do is prep your palette. So often this means coating it with a few layers of oil and letting it dry. So like oiling your palette, letting it dry, oiling your palette, letting it dry. But please, 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 anytime you ever have oil on a rag, it's very dangerous to have a rag crumpled up. And full disclosure, SIA is not responsible for your studio safety at home. We take no responsibility whatsoever. We're giving you our best knowledge of how things work. But when you have a crumpled rag, my understanding, and I've seen it happen in ateliers before, is there's a chemical reaction that's created that can catch that rag on fire. I was told once when I was touring Rembrandt's studio in Amsterdam that he had burnt his studio down this way with a crumpled up oil-soaked rag, but I haven't been able to verify that with any written sources, but that's what a guide once told me at the Rembrandt Museum. So when you have a palette, it comes raw. You need to put a few, rub some oil on it, let it dry, rub some oil on it, let it dry. And with your oil soaked rag, never, ever, ever leave it crumpled up anywhere. Dispose in an outside garbage can flat. All right. So I'm seeing a good question in the chat. What do you use to thin the oil paint? I personally don't use anything to thin my oil paint. I use oil paint in a thicker viscosity directly out of the tube. Occasionally, I will use a tiny bit of Gamasol to thin the paint if I'm using it as a drawing tool, if I need it to be really thin. But I try so hard to develop systems for painting that don't involve thinning the paint or adding anything to the paint. One, because all these contemporary mediums that we have no idea long-term how they're going to behave or act on canvas or anything like that. And two, I'm just trying to keep things simple and affordable, right? So the less pieces, especially for those of you who want to teach painting in your classrooms, like the less pieces you have to deal with, the easier it is to focus on the painting. So like in the boot camp that I'm going to be talking about, like we keep it very simple, very straightforward, and we don't thin the paint. Another reason that we don't thin the paint is because students, especially when they're new to oil painting, will add so much thinner that they're basically creating watercolors. And like, what's the point? Like the point of painting in oils is the opaqueness of the paint, longevity of the paint, et cetera, what it can do. Like as soon as you start thinning it down that much, it's a different medium. It becomes watercolor. So George has a good question. Any thoughts on fat over lean? Yeah, so for those of you who might not be familiar with this term, the idea is that you want your oilier paint to go over leaner paint. So if you do an underpainting, you want it to be a little bit thinner than the paint that goes on top of it. So you can make paint fatter by adding a little bit of oil to it, or you can make paint thinner by, adding a paint thinner like Gamsol or, one of the other additives out there. So yes, we know that you want to paint fat over lean for the longevity of your paintings. So that's something to keep in mind. I try not to thin or thicken my paint, and so my layers tend to be more even, but I also tend to not have more than 2 or 3 layers on any area of my painting. So that's how I manage the fat over the lean problem. But yes, that's a very good point that George has. Okay, so moving on. Any questions about a raw palette and why we need to prep the palette? Why you want to oil your palette before you put paint on it so that it doesn't suck all the oil out of your oil paint and make it a pain to work with? Okay. All right. So I'm going to, before I get into this next part, just any general questions about what we've covered. So we talked about why master copies, how they, like, why they're so important for learning, you know, that you really need to know what you're looking for in a master copy in order to learn from it. Otherwise you'll end up with like that funny face, the funny face that we saw earlier. So it's not just about doing master copies, it's about doing them the right way and how you need to have an understanding of key Atelier skills in order to really copy them. And then we also talked about what was wrong with the master copy, right? So the drawing was lost. Well, how do you maintain a drawing when you're painting? That's something that I spend a lot of time teaching my students in my classes. You know, how do you maintain your values? You know, values are both a drawing and a color problem. You know, so how do you control your values when you're painting? That's a huge issue. And then we we talked about, you know, what the problems were with that and what we can do as aspiring artists to try to avoid those mistakes. So George is asking, are there online sources that discuss the master techniques? Yes, there's so many good online resources now. But actually, George, this is a perfect segue into describing the class that I run online that provides really detailed instruction on how to do a master copy and how to paint more generally. So, oh, and Grace is asking, how about a glass chopping board for a palette? Glass. Okay, let's talk about glass really quick before we go on to this next thing. So glass is really, really heavy. If you want to hold your palette, it's not very good. I do have friends that prefer painting on glass and they have it on a table in front of them. The reason I don't like that is because I'm looking down, mixing, and then looking up and putting my paint color down. Whereas when I'm holding my palette, I can often, you know, mix and place with less interruption. That seems like a minor thing, but you'll discover as you really train that the more efficient your processes get, the more time that the more brain power you can put to solving the hard problems and less brain power to logistical problems. And Dippy is asking about a plastic palette. So you can use a plastic palette, but I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend a wood palette over all other palettes for a few reasons. These are really good questions, you guys. So the plastic palette, the problem is that when you're mixing with a palette knife, it's really easy to create scratches in a plastic palette. And those scratches add up and make it harder and harder to paint over time. Whereas a wood palette, every time you oil your palette, every time you wipe it down at the end of a painting session, it leaves a small patina on your palette. And over time, it creates this beautiful, smooth surface that's ideal for mixing paint on. It gets better with use, whereas the plastic palette gets worse with use. So if you've never used a wood palette before, they're so cheap. Like you can get them off of Amazon or whatever, like for a few dollars. Like they're so cheap, and you only need one palette that you take good care of to have a beautiful, beautiful palette. In New York City, there's this place called the Salmagundi Club, and they have artist palettes from all these famous, you know, American artists that were part of the club, you know, 100 years ago. And you can just see this beautiful patina on these palettes. They're gorgeous. Okay, so more good questions. Eve is asking, how do you clean a wood palette? So there's a few ways to clean a wood palette. What I recommend doing is just scraping off all of the paint as best you can with a palette knife, And if you don't mind a darker patina, just rub the whole palette to even out the rest of the oil paint, and it'll build up a patina. So you don't have to have any terps or anything. Now, if you prefer a really clean, super clean palette and you don't have a day or two for it to dry between sessions, because if you just rub everything down, sometimes there'll still be like a little bit of wet paint underneath. And if you go to paint the next day, it'll infect your colors. So if you do it that way, you need to give your palette like a day to dry in between. If you don't want to give it a day to dry in between, if you use just a couple drops of Gamsol and then wipe it with a paper towel, that cleans the palette really well. And this is all covered in depth. Like I have like really detailed instructions on palette, like how to, you know, prep your palette and everything in our online class. Oh, so many good questions. Can you use linseed oil to thin oil paints? You can, however, warning, warning, warning. Anytime you're using just oil, you risk somewhere having a crumpled up oil rag that may catch your studio on fire. So I don't ever let students add oil. I never give my students oil. I never teach with them adding oil because I don't trust them not to leave a crumpled rag somewhere. So yes, it's very legitimate to add oil to your paint. That makes your oil fatter. That makes that paint fatter. So you want to think fat over lean when you're painting. However, I strongly discourage using oil as much as possible. I only ever use oil to prep my palettes. And when I'm teaching, I prep all the palettes myself. I don't let the students do it so that I can dispose of the rag properly. Ceramic plate. You can, but it's the same thing with the plastic. The ceramic will scratch with your palette knife when you're mixing colors and become less useful to you. Just get a wood palette, people. Like seriously, it's so cheap. You don't even have to have like an official wood palette, like any like scrap of wood. If you don't mind it being like so heavy. And also if you have any friend with woodworking tools or whatever, like I know a lot of people that just make custom shape palettes because they like a particular shape. You can get them so cheap. Just get a wood palette. Like you can have it like ordered, delivered to your house from whatever art supply store. Just get a wood palette. Gamsol versus odorless terp. So Marguerite's asking this. So I don't use terps at all ever. Gamsol is the only I don't know, chemical that I ever use, and even then I only like put like a little stab mark in the top of it. So I use one drop at a time if I want to clean my palette completely, and that's the only thing I ever use it for. Or I just lied to you because I also use it to thin my paint when I'm drawing directly on canvas. So if I'm not doing a drawing transfer and I'm drawing directly on canvas, then I will use it that way. But I don't have experience with odorless terps other than Gamsol, so my recommendation is Gamsol. The reason I don't have experience with other things is because the Atelier community universally agrees that it is the least odorous of the spirits. That being said, I have been told by certain paint manufacturers that they are developing a coconut-based terp, basically, that's completely organic. And I cannot wait for this to be a real thing. I was told that might be coming out in the next year or so. So I hope this isn't just wishful thinking on my part and that this is actually true, in which case it would solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. So George is asking, linseed yellows over time. So this is a great question about oils. So here's the thing about the oils. The reason you use refined linseed is because the less pollutants that are in the oil, the less yellow it becomes over time, right? So that's why you have like triple refined or whatever. So the higher the quality of the linseed oil that you're using, and this is true for walnut oil or any of the other oils that are out there, the better off you are. You know, I've heard people, you know, students were like, I'm not going to pay $20 for a little bottle of linseed oil. I just found a whole jug of linseed oil at the, I don't know, hardware store or something, but it's not refined. And so it's going to create a lot of pollution over time as it yellows. George, I don't know the specifics between cold pressed or not cold pressed. I know what matters is how clear the oil is, like how well, like how much of the impurities are taken out of the oil creates the better product and reduces the yellowing. I would not use unrefined, absolutely not use unrefined. Definitely use refined linseed oil. But I'm not familiar with the specific term cold press, and I don't want to assert an opinion or authority on something that I'm unfamiliar with. Okay, all right, so here's the deal. So if you want to make master copies, if you want to improve your art through the creation of master copies, if you want to really learn how to draw and paint with Atelier skills, you need a process for implementing this. So your first choice is you can keep spinning your wheels, trying to learn 1,000 years of artistic knowledge on your own, piecing it together, reading online or books or whatever. But keep in mind also, there's so much bad information out there. Remember that Atelier skills nearly went extinct for like the last 100 years. They were barely accessible. And there's a lot of people putting out what is the best information that they have, but it is not good. So you have to be really careful when you're learning online to make sure that to vet the person. Did they actually get Atelier training? Did they go to an Atelier that's recognized as a good Atelier? You want to do your homework, because when you're a new student and you don't know these things yet, you don't have the ability to kind of see the difference in the instructors that are claiming that they can teach you Atelier training, right? So definitely do your homework. Okay, your option number 2 is that you can learn from someone that knows what the heck that they're doing, okay? And so that's why I created this boot camp. So you may have been receiving some emails from me this week about the Atelier Painting Boot Camp, because essentially what we've done is we've created an entire set of video courses that has me teaching. And then on top of that, I am critiquing multiple times a week in this platform. So it's like an online course platform. You can chat with me in there. You can post your work in there for written critiques, and you can get very, very thorough video instruction that covers a very specific step-by-step process in how to paint. So some of the things that we do in there, I'll teach you how to set up a painting studio the right way, right? So just like setting up your palette the right way, you want your studio to be set up the right way. You don't want to have to fight bad setup. Like painting's already hard enough. You want to optimize everything around you so that you can use your brain power for learning how to draw and paint, not fighting bad light, not fighting a bad easel position, not creating more work for yourself than is necessary. We're going to teach you how to master your materials. So there have been so many great questions just in this chat, right? But if you go, let's say this class ends and you go and pick up your painting and palette, you're going to have a lot more questions about the different materials, like what canvas should I use? What's the underpainting? What colors for the underpainting? How do I make an underpainting? Like which brush should I use? Do you have a brand that you recommend? All of these things. So, in the online course, I have a master supply list with links so that it's really easy to just find everything that you need to paint using exactly the same materials that I'm using in the videos to show you how to do the painting. Discover good painting techniques. So there is a lot of bad information out there. You want the good information, right? So you can go online and sort through it yourself as best you can, but there are known painting processes that have been handed down for generations and generations from Atelier trained artists to Atelier trained artists. And when you train with an Atelier trained artist, you become part of that link, okay? So you're getting information that is the collected body of knowledge on how to draw and paint that's been collected for over 1,000 years. And stop getting stuck. I love this picture so much because this is how I felt before I found Atelier training, right? Like you don't have to be stuck. Like if you want to draw and paint realistically, if you want to be able to draw and paint anything that's in your head and in your heart without compromise, you can do so with Atelier training. You don't have to be stuck. But it does take dedication, effort, time, resources to learn these skills. So if you really want it, you really have to want it. You really have to pursue it and take yourself seriously and take your art seriously. Okay, so you can learn with me and other Atelier trained artists guiding you. So I work with a team of Atelier trained instructors that, are instructors at some of the best ateliers in the world, and we work online with you together. We offer critiques, we offer input classes. We guide you, we answer your chat questions along the way. We're there for you, and on top of that. You're part of a community. Like you're working not just by yourself, but you're working with other people who are trying and striving for the same thing that you are. So George has a great question. He's asking, are the classes one-on-one or in groups? So I used to do one-on-one critiques, George, but I actually found that my group critiques, that all students were doing better because they were hearing and seeing the mistakes of other students. So now I only do group critiques. So twice a week, anybody that wants a critique just signs into the critique forum. We give a critique. If you can't make it, all the critiques are recorded, and then you have access to them to watch on your own time. And also, if you can't make a critique live, you can put your painting in the chat and get a written critique from the instructors. So, we really value the community building because it's hard enough to learn how to oil paint, and sometimes we need, that community. You can reach out to your other classmates. There's a chat feature in the course. So like if someone had a critique or said something that was interesting or had an idea that you liked, you can reach out to them in the chat and be like, hey, how did you think of that? Or, do you have any advice on this? So it's definitely, it's a cohort, it's a group, and it's a group of people that are serious about learning how to paint. So what's the investment? Our class is $500 a month. So it's an ongoing class. It's kind of like a gym membership, like come and train when you can, train there for the months that you're ready to be dedicated and serious, and you can, train for as many months as you want. I found that some of our students that are already in the class, like I did like a beta launch of this a couple months ago, just to work out all the kinks and everything. And, I have a student who's on her 4th painting right now, and she's already progressed from the mastercopy section that we started with to trying to paint landscapes. So, really learning the core skill is like the first step, but you can stay and learn painting, and we coach you through your projects that you want to do. We ask you to do the mastercopy first because that's where we're teaching you good habits, good techniques, and our process and our language, so that you have a common language with us when we're giving you the critiques. But once you've, done a couple of your master copies, then, as you start working on your other paintings, our instructors and our resources are there for you to help guide you. Okay, so what do you get? $500 a month. That's a serious investment. So why is it $500 a month, and what are you going to get? So you get 2 critiques a week from me or another Atelier trained instructor. I do the majority of the critiques right now, but our classes are growing. So we want to make sure that every question in every critique session gets answered. So we're going to be adding sessions as needed to ensure that every student gets their critique every time. There's more than 15 extensive videos. I mean, we're talking like very thorough. Like there's entire videos just on how to transfer your drawing to a canvas, right? And it covers deep, every level question. It also includes from our beta testing the questions that students had in the class, and it includes some critiques that we gave students in the beta testing class, so that not only are we giving you all this great information up front, but we're also able to showcase, okay, here's some ways that people got off track and how we got them back on track. So you're learning along with your cohort. We send you a master copy bundle because not all master copies are created equal. And so some are easier to copy, some are more challenging to copy, some are better suited to the process that we're teaching you in this class to get you started. So we're setting you up for success by helping you start with images that are going to yield you a really solid result with the process that we're teaching you. And once you get used to that, then of course you can go on to copy paintings that really inspire you. We also give you really thorough instructions on how to print your master copies, what art supplies you need, how to set up your studio safety, how to prep your palette. So we have written resources. For each of the video resources we give you, we also include a PowerPoint that you can download. So if you're wanting something to have an easy reference while you're painting, all the steps are in the PowerPoints that you can download from the lesson. And also, if you're a school teacher and you want to teach this in your classroom, all the PowerPoints are there. You can download them and use them in your own classes to kind of help, guide you as you're trying to teach others what you've learned. And then, like I was saying, we have this whole online course community. So you can see in this image here, the course materials are where all the videos are. We have written critiques, we have live critiques, and we have, a critique library where you can watch all the former critiques and learn from your peers. We also have a chat feature, so you can see in the upper right hand, you can chat with anybody that you want. There's a group chat, so anybody who's enrolled in the class can be part of a big conversation. And you can also post your questions and get, responses from Atelier trained artists to your questions in a live chat. It's basically like your favorite social media platform plus an online course, right? So you can communicate and you can post and share with each other. At the same time, you have access to all the video instruction, and most importantly, you have access to Atelier trained artists to keep you from doing dumb things, right? Because when you're learning, like students, they don't know, always the right way to move forward. And we do a very thorough job in our instruction to, outline what the biggest mistakes might be. But you might be like, hey, this isn't working out. What am I doing wrong? You post it up in the chat and you get a response, from an Atelier trained person to help make sure that you're going in the right direction. Okay, so these are all the things that are included in the monthly fee. And again, it's expected that even if you haven't had time to work on your own paintings, like come to the critiques. You will learn so much just watching what other people are doing, seeing how they're solving problems. Sometimes just seeing critique is what you need to inspire you to, dig deep after you've had a frustrating painting problem and get back in front of your easel and back to painting, So it really is a community. It's really hard to learn painting alone, right? Even if I were to because I considered it, I was like, maybe I'll just put the videos out there and people, but what I wanted was people to have a transformation. I want you to actually learn how to paint. I don't want you to buy some videos and not watch them, right? I want you to have access to all this top-notch information and the guidance, because that's what's really going to help you. That's going to take you from where you are to an Atelier level of skill, is having an Atelier trained person coaching you. Okay, so here it is. If you're interested in the boot camp, I'll also kind of throw up a link in the chat. This link also has way, way, way more details about the boot camp, and it has the commonly asked questions in here. So this link has tons more information about the boot camp if you're interested in pursuing Atelier training. So I really hope that if what you want is drawing and painting, I hope that you join us in the boot camp, because I know that we can get you there. I've seen students, and in fact, later today, or maybe tomorrow, I've been sending out a lot of emails, but I'm going to send out like one of our critiques later, and you can see, how the process works and how it might help you. Okay, so basically, if you click on this link, you'll see the more information. You'll be asked to create an account, and then you can purchase the boot camp once you've created the account. Okay, and I did promise everybody all your questions and all your answers. So any questions about what we've covered today, any questions about the boot camp, any questions about Mastercopies, or, I'm here for you. I will answer all your questions. Oh, I'm seeing quite a bit in the chat here. So there's a few questions that I missed from earlier too. So I'm just trying to make sure I catch those. Okay, there were quite a few color questions, and even like how to mix the colors. Again, so we're doing this whole free series of workshops. There's 5 in this series, and on Sunday we'll be going into a really deep dive into color and how to really mix the exact color that you want